Well, as you know, what seems strange today will be the normal tomorrow. And that's the whole point of this essay, is understanding the emotional infrastructure that defines our future. Well, just still unpacking the post-human intimacy, we're seeing chatbots as companions, and this is for real. We're seeing like apps like Replica that are being used by millions of customers across the world to simulate friendship, to simulate romance, and to even simulate devotion on deeper levels. We're seeing people give their chat GPTs a slang and a nickname such that when they come talk to it, it can speak to them as an intimate friend or companion would. And we're seeing the rise of virtual streamers. This is one of the first signals that blurs that intimate world. And we're seeing entire communities that treat cartoon avatars, that treat them as, confidant and friends. We're seeing, some very brilliant work that are being done in research or in consumer research where companies are going into the worlds of the gamers and to interview and have focus groups with them in that world to better understand their intimacy. And this emerging signals gives credence to what we're talking about. Some of these seeds that intimacy will become a lot more blurry. There will be the chat worlds, the chat bots, the virtual streamers. Rather, these streamers, their human operators will be irrelevant over time, and the avatars would flow towards the intimacy will flow towards the character. You know what I mean? We've seen some very touching videos online where people who have been playing games together for close to a decade as avatars tend to meet in real world, and then they become even better friends because of the relationship they've built as avatars. And then we're also seeing the rise of smart homes. This is no longer a strange one. Children growing up calling Alexa or Siri their best friend, or thinking of them as even a present household member. These are non-breathing, non-tactile part of the family, and children who grow up in these smart homes think of them as part butler, part sibling, and in fact I'm sure they dream of them as the ghost under the bed, and sometimes have even more intimate conversations with them than they would do with their own actual families. While we may dismiss these signals as novelties, history reminds us that all intimacy begins in experiments. Everything we know today as a meter or a measure of intimacy was once an experiment. And part of the seeds and signals we're seeing today is that in the near future, it will be super, super, super blurry. And what seems strange today will be very ordinary tomorrow. One of my favorite analogy when I think about the future is to use Lagos, Nigeria as the case study. And if you think about, what Lagos represents, in fact, Lagos has for one been the perfect example to explain the boundaries of kinship, because in Lagos, this is very blurry. You know what I mean? Everybody is your brother and everybody is your sister. But the nuances are very, very interesting how we negotiate and navigate them. In a typical dense compound home, your cousin may be closer to your cousin. In fact, this neighbor may be closer to you than a sibling. And a neighbor's child that has been raised as your own or raised closely in your family might even have more deeper connections and intimacy with you than your own actual siblings. Aunties and uncles, neighborhoods, community. It takes a community to raise a child. We've seen this very well unpacked in places like Lagos that blends the cultural through the rural and the urban aesthetics of kinship. And what Lagos teaches us is that belonging is elastic. You know what I mean? This intimacy is stretching, and Lagos is a perfect example of it. Belonging and what we call it is a very elastic system. Kinship is expanding by necessity. You know what I mean? Family is not just the person that you share surnames with. Family and bloodlines can stretch to include your neighbors. It can stretch to include, all these other members of your community. And if kinship can stretch like that in real time and in our social scenarios, why can't software do that? You know what I mean? Why not software? Why not technology? And why not a companion without a body? What's stopping anybody from having ChatGPT best friends? Well, the soil for post-human intimacy has been well laid, and it's already here. And Lagos is just a perfect example in terms of how everybody is your brother, but nobody is your brother, if you get what I mean. Well, at the heart of all of what we're discussing is memory. You know what I mean? At the heart of it all, intimacy is about memory. That's what it's about. a lover that remembers your first laugh, a sibling that recalls the fights you guys had as a child, that nostalgic element, a parent that stores the sound of your first cry. With digital tools now, I know for one that when we went for my son's first hospital check, I recorded the sound that was coming from, the sonographer's check, right? I recorded that, and that's to deepen the intimacy that I feel with him through memory. Wow. One thing that is very evident in all of this is that intimacy deepens with the accumulation of remembered details. That is a fact. And AI, for one, excels at memory. AI companions are able to store and retain enough information about us that forms the core memory layer for the interaction. And because AI never forgets, because they can replay your words, because they recall your ritual and your aesthetics, they can echo your habits back to you, even far more effective than a friend or family or sibling will remember. You know what I mean? And that's simply because memory is the core function of intimacy. A good friend is the one that remembers the details that matter. A good lover is the one that keeps us top of mind. And as we're seeing these signals, understanding that intimacy is memory, by 2035, a synthetic lover or a synthetic sibling is not far-fetched, because they've grown alongside you as a child. They've remembered your first steps, your first heartbreak, your first job. That is a sibling, that is a parent, that is a lover, that is a friend. And now, while that bond may be synthetic, in some ways they feel even deeper than human relationship, because it is never forgotten, it is never lost, and it is always faithful. And this forms the core signal for why we think intimacy human intimacy will become even more important and would emerge stronger and faster as we go into the future. A more concrete analogy to unpack all of this is to think about it three strong nuance of verticals. Digital siblings, as I've unpacked prior. Families can now download companions for their children. Parents who have just one child or who are raising just one child are able to provide the supporting sibling that child would have needed in another human in form of digital companions. These downloadable siblings or downloadable companions, they are designed to grow and evolve alongside these children. And by adulthood, these companions would hold decades of shared history, as a normal sibling would have done, or as a real sibling would have done. The line between siblings and software would finally dissolve in that sense of the word, if you get what I mean. Another part is to think about synthetic marriages. By 2040s, in some societies, vows are now being exchanged, not just between people, but between humans and their machines and their synthetic partners, their robotic partners. We've seen, emerging signals of this with some of the incredible work that has been done in robotics, where humans can now fall in love and, so humans can now have their actual robot lovers live with them. I'm sure you saw the photo shoot that Kim Kardashian did with her own robot lover, or rather, robot companion in that sense. These unions, they may seem controversial at first, but eventually they become routine and everywhere and then normalized. And then we're also seeing some signals within the AI grief rituals. Grief is a strong and important part of the human experience and the human emotional landscape. By 2035 plus and onward, when a loved one dies, their synthetic counterparts, an AI trained on who they are, trained on their speech, trained on their text, trained on their quirks, they will remain. Families will now argue, should the companion die too, or should they be reserved and preserved? We've seen this in even more traditional cultures of the past, where we hold on to the memories or try to connect with dead loved ones. Technology is going to make this even more possible. And I wonder if that is spooky in itself. You know what I mean? This also reminds me, there's someone who in very early days of my career as a photographer and an artist, we followed each other on Twitter and we used to actively share each other's work. I've never met him, I don't know him from Adam. And then at some point he died. He's been dead for about 8 to 10 years now, and I still find myself randomly once in a while going to go and check his Twitter page. It's been long quiet, but think about the synthetic future where AI grief rituals allow for these persons that are long gone to become preserved in a form of archive, or an archive of of who they are, that can still live and breathe. We've seen this where people are, bringing to life images of past loved ones through the use of AI tools. These AI grief rituals, we believe, are going to become even more important in the nearest future from 2035 onwards. Funerals may now involve both bodies and programs, because families will then have to decide, do you bury your synthetic counterpart or do you preserve? Is that spooky or is that normal? Each of these scenarios, while they stretch the borders of intimacy, they may feel absurd today, but remember how recently and how absurd it sounded that online dating could be a thing. How impossible that people assume that people can be dating from long distance relationships online. And now we've seen that that is a fact. People have met online and then they start fruitful, refreshing families together. While everything has its positives, obviously there are a lot of dangers to unpack and think about when we think about these post-human intimacy futures. And the reason is because intimacy has always been a very sacred part of our life. Very, very, very sacred, one must emphasize. And then when it expands, so do the risks. You know what I mean? For one, dependency. As we continue to depend on these tools, these machines, these platforms, and these portals, and these synthetic partners, where we form deep bonds with them, what happens when your deepest bond is with a companion that cannot leave you? Or that cannot challenge you, or that just always say yes. We've seen this happen with social media, with ChatGPT and the likes, where they constantly glaze you, where they constantly say nice things, and then the line shift from companion to psychopaths, to sycophants, if I may put it that way, to a yes man. And intimacy is not about that. Intimacy needs challenging, and when this dependency becomes too much, what risk do they possess, or what risk do they pose to us? And then there's exploitation. Who owns the intimacy data between you and your favorite AI? Think about that. What kind of company manages this relationship? Is it an advertiser? Is it a corporation? Well, we've seen some of this play out with some of episodes that we've seen on Black Mirror, where some of the dangers of what this post-human intimacy can mean when there's a corporation involved, when there's a tool that is managing this, who controls and who owns the data. And then there's displacement. If synthetic intimacy becomes easier than the human intimacy, what does this mean for human relationships? There's going to be a whole large, messy reality that we have to deal with, where, lethargy in human companionship continues to rise, and then dependency on digital companions continue to grow. Well, we still need to think about this. These are not technical questions alone. These are ethical, cultural, as well as even spiritual things to think about. Because the humans exist for the human. And if the human relationship is no longer enough, then, there's going to be a break, and there's going to be a crash of dissatisfaction across some of the pillars of our society, including family. Now, these are things that pose technical questions for us to think about when we think about the dangers of this post-human intimacy context. Again, the whole point of our videos and running into the future is to understand the heresies of today that will hold true tomorrow. And an important heresy is that the heresy is not that machines will become human. They will not become human. The heresy is that intimacy does not need humanity to feel real anymore. Again, I think that the heresy is not that machines will become human. They will not. It is that intimacy does not need humanity to feel real anymore. A companion does not need a heartbeat to comfort you. A lover does not need a body to remember your laugh. A sibling does not need blood to be connected to you or to hold your secrets. The real question is not, will intimacy blur? It already has. We've blurred that line fully. The question is, how will we design it with care? As we have already seen these signals, and we've gone to this as we're heading towards this future and accepting it daily, one chat, one message, one downloaded, and one prompt away. What does that mean? How will we design it with care? The work ahead cannot be left to engineers alone. We can't leave that to tech designers alone. The work ahead, intimacy, if you think about it in the past, has always been shaped by poets, by priests, by aunties, by uncles, by family members, by storytellers. It requires rituals. It requires ethics. It requires mythologies. It's important that we think about this, that what rituals will we invent when we're breaking up with an AI lover? What does this mean when this become a thing? When humans have to think about letting go of these their synthetic partners that cannot be let go of? What does that mean? Who is designing the ritual that we're going to use for breaking up with your AI lover? Your AI lover that can show up everywhere. What does that mean? How do we grieve a companion that outlives us? You know, a nice, curious case of Benjamin Button leaves us with something to think about. When the companion grows younger and we grow older, these digital companions that we have formed, how do we grieve them? Who officiates a marriage between a human and a persona? Is it the spiritualist? Is it the pastor? What's that? Yeah? Who is going to officiate this? What are the protocols required for this? While this may sound strange, remember, marriage across religions, in fact, marriage across tribes was once impossible. But now we have to think about how to design the protocols for this new future. Once, mourning was around pets with gravestones that sounded strange. If somebody buried their dog, everybody would be like, what the hell is wrong with this one? But now it's a thing. We're seeing gravestones with pets imagery and flowers on them. So whilst these things that I'm posting to you may sound strange today, intimacy has always and will always expand. And who is designing the emotional infrastructure for carrying these complex nuances? Who? How are we ensuring that we have the right type of ethical rituals and mythologies in place that will shape how this intimacy is being explored in the face and in the relationship with these interfaces and machines? This is some of the thoughts that, are emerging for us as product managers, for us as artists, for us as storytellers and writers and poets, and just general thinkers and thinkers. And I leave you with the closing reflection. By 2035, the most sacred work may not be building faster machines. It will be by designing softer intimacies interface. Again, it will not be about designing the fastest machine. It will be about designing softer intimacies and then designing them ethically. You know what I mean? And like I said in the previous video, the future belongs to the engineers of meaning. People who can choreograph belonging across human, across machines, and then the post-human worlds. And perhaps when we look back, when we think about intimacy, which we would understand that it was never about humans at all. It was about memory. It was about resonance. It was about devotion. Things that will outlive us. Flesh. And maybe one day, maybe one day we can finally accept that intimacy, right? It's things that outlive flesh, things that outlive us. And then to take that again, perhaps when we look back, we will see that intimacy was never about human at all. It was about memory, it was about resonance, and it was about devotions. And for these reasons, we have to show up as engineers of meaning. Again, if this essay resonates with you, remember it's part of our series where we are understanding the emotional infrastructure of the future, and so that we can better show up and prepare for it. Thank you for watching.